The world is celebrating 100 years of Bollywood, the triumph of an industry that continues to challenge the status quo of Western storytelling. Bollywood might have to watch its back as the Nigerian film industry, known as Nollywood, steps up to challenge the Eastern industry for the title of most productive film industry. According to UNESCO, Nollywood is the world's second highest producing film industry after Bollywood. The fast-paced, high-turnover industry of Nollywood is revolutionizing the movie-making model. All this was created without foreign aid or government subsidies. Nigerians are telling their own stories and making movies their own way. What has this meant for the Nigerian people? Today on the show, I have Yewande Sadiku, an executive producer of the film Half of a Yellow Sun, who raised the bulk of the money for her big-budget film almost exclusively from Nigerians. And later on, we speak to B. Bandele, a London-based author and playwright who has now added film to his resume in his directorial debut of Half of a Yellow Sun. But first, joining us from Boston, I have Franco Sacchi, an Italian filmmaker whose fascination with the industry led to him making his award-winning documentary, This is Nollywood. Take a look at this.
Action!
You can finance a movie with just $10,000 in Nigeria here, and you should shoot in 7 days.
We're doing films for the masses. We're not doing films for the elite and the people in their glass houses. No, they can afford to watch their RoboCop and whatever.
Auto check.
The first thing you have to remember about this society is that Africa still has people that live on $1 a day. And these are the people that really watch these films.
Action! Come on.
So now you're about to see how we do our own movies here, with or without any assistance from anybody.
Action! Hey!
Franco, thank you very much for joining us on South2North. Welcome. Now, I know you were born in Zambia, so your roots are still on the continent. But what made you leave Boston and go to Nigeria to explore Nollywood?
As a documentary filmmaker, when I first heard of Nollywood, I really had this immediate feeling that it was an incredible opportunity to finally tell a story, an African story that would break the usual stereotype and would be completely unexpected. It's a profoundly positive story. It's a success story, and from a cultural point of view, it's an enormous phenomenon, in my opinion.
What did you learn about how Nigerians actually produce the films? As a viewer, it looks like a no-fuss type of production, very quick turnaround time, low budget, and yet the stories are so gripping and so many people. Here in South Africa, where I am, certainly Nollywood is being spoken about a lot. Tell us about how Nigerians work to produce these films.
These filmmakers really are incredibly courageous, and at some point in time, in the early mid-90s, they really felt had no other options than just grab the available tools and start telling their stories. But I think even these Nigerian filmmakers were surprised when they found out the thirst, the desire that was among West African audiences for homegrown stories, for authentic Nigerian stories. The digital revolution was just around the corner in the 90s, and that, I think, really turned Nollywood around. It's possible to make a good quality film with very inexpensive tools. Editing, as we know, really became really affordable around that time in the late 90s, early 2000. And I think that also impacted. But my impression is, beyond the technology, is they found that there was a real need for stories.
Would you say that Nollywood has turned the economy of making films around? I mean, filmmaking is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States, and perhaps somewhere in the world, filmmakers are saying we can't make our films without money. Does Nollywood teach us a significant lesson about quality and producing films even when the resources are not there?
A lot of people kind of look in a condescending way to the low production values of Nollywood, particularly in the beginning. Things are changing now, of course. But that it's exactly what allowed the freedom to experiment, to try. First and foremost in Nollywood, it was the story that counted. People were really willing to, overlook, production values, maybe sound or image quality. What the audience wanted was to identify in these actors, identifying with the stories, identify with the culture. And that was more important than the technology. I really think the early days of Nollywood were really exciting. It must have been an crazy time and incredible excitement. Just make one film after the other.
Is this a product that can be exported, or will Nollywood continue to be successful in Nigeria and neighboring countries because they identify with the culture and the storyline? Let's look at Bollywood, for example. The world is watching those films. So how do they navigate their way around that quality, the low production cost that you were talking about, and the need perhaps to export the product? Or maybe that's not what it's about.
There is no doubt that Nollywood has reached a point now where it's seriously looking at improving these production values. And because that would certainly open up the possibility of reaching foreign markets. At the moment, there is no doubt that when a Nollywood producer look at foreign markets, their primary goal is to reach the Africans in the diaspora. And it's an enormous market. And it's already happening. I mean, there are, streaming and distribution companies that are already tapping that market.
Speaking of returns, I understand that according to the World Bank even, for every DVD that gets sold, 9 get pirated. That must be a huge loss for the filmmakers themselves.
I think after agriculture and oil, one of the largest, if not the third largest employer in the country. And yet you brought up the number one issue, it's piracy. I think, in my opinion, this industry needs to learn to build more resiliency and look at every other possible, other additional ways of revenue rather than direct sales. There is, in my opinion, a lot of untapped areas. So piracy has to be tackled, and in parallel, they really need to look at other forms of probably streaming abroad, other forms of revenue. Right. I don't have the solution. I'm a filmmaker, but
well, I'm sure
it's exciting. I'm still excited.
It sounds like you're very excited, but I'm sure our next guests will have ideas about where to tap into that investment that will make Nollywood even more viable. Our next guest is Yewande Sadiku, an executive producer of the film Half of a Yellow Sun, adapted from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's award-winning book of the same name. Sadiku is an investment banker who used her skills to finance the film locally. She joins us now. Welcome. Have a seat. It's a long journey, a long journey from investment banker to film producer. How did that happen?
Well, I'm still in investment banking, and if the truth be told, I'm not really producing films. I'm just using the skills I have as an investment banker to support the real filmmakers. If the book wasn't what it was, we would have struggled to raise the funding for it in the first instance. Mm-hmm. The funding for Half of a Yellow Sun, the bulk of it came from Nigerian investors. Most of the people have never invested in film before. When we started the fundraising, the book had already sold about 1 million copies. The book had been translated into 30 languages. So I had material, at the very least, that people could relate to. But because of my day job, I understood what investors would like to see. People want to invest. The word investment means that you put money in something and you expect to get it back. The challenge with many Nollywood productions is distribution. It's difficult to explain to anybody, to articulate how the returns will come back to them. So for Half of a Yellow Sun, the investor memorandum that we put together, and we had to put together an investor memorandum as you would put together, a prospectus for any transaction.
Would you place Half of a Yellow Sun in the same category as a typical Nollywood story?
It's not a typical film. I think Half of a Yellow Sun demonstrates what is possible with a made-in-Nigeria production, with the right level of financing and with the right quality of technical skills and technical equipment.
Franco spoke quite glowingly, and I see he sees that as a positive attribute of Nollywood, that filmmakers have done amazing things with very little resources. So in order to attain the quality, do we necessarily need money? What do you learn from Half of a Yellow Sun? Can you tell the authentic Nigerian film without money? Like the Nollywood film directors are doing?
Yes, you can tell an authentic film without money. But if you want to tell a film that people who have no relation to that culture, who have no knowledge of it, if you want to tell something that, if you want to tell a story that you want them to listen to, then you have to tell the story in a way that they can access it. And you have to present it in a way that they can access it. I think to make that leap, Nollywood needs to get access to formal financing.
Franco, what are your thoughts on this one? One of the features of Nollywood that you seem to be celebrating is that with very little money, these filmmakers are doing amazing things. But here's a film, Half of a Yellow Sun, that required about $8 million to make, which is a large sum of money compared with the films that you covered. Would it still be authentically Nollywood if so much money is going into it? Or is that the beauty of Nollywood, that with very little, you are achieving so much?
Nollywood is not something or the other. It can be a lot of different things. And I think it's very inspiring what Yewanda is doing, and it's showing one end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum, there is still a need for a mass production of stories to satisfy the market. And I have a personal interest in how we can improve the quality of the films within small budgets. And at the same time, I think the filmmakers who are on the ground and who are churning out 10, 15, 20 films a year, they really need to understand that they still have an enormous opportunity to improve their production value, focusing on training and skills rather than on huge capital investment.
Yewanda, you've got thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, Nollywood means that the film is made in Nigeria. It represents the Nigerian film industry. The fact that we say that Nollywood is the quality it is now doesn't mean that if you make better quality films, that it would be less Nollywood. Nigerian. It's the same way that in the US, there are films that are low-budget films made for $5 million, $100,000, and then there are large-budget movies made for $300 million. Until you really charge a Nigerian producer with the kind of budget to make a high production quality film, you really don't know the fullness of Nollywood's potential. With the sort of budget that we had for Half of a Yellow Sun, we knew that we could not get those returns if we focused entirely on just the African continent, on just the audience that consumes Nollywood films. So we had to use a combination. In the same way that from a financing perspective, we used a combination of Nigerian and British funding for cast, for crew, for every single aspect.
And we are part of the global world.
Exactly.
Hollywood functions exactly the same way.
Absolutely.
But Franco, I do want to ask you the importance of storytelling. You have said previously that the key to a healthy society is a thriving community of storytellers. As people who were previously colonized, that really resonates with us. But have we started telling our stories in a way that the world notices?
I strongly believe that if for a moment you start thinking of what a society looks like without stories, you really see it's barely human, right? So stories are what really makes us human. And now each society has to give its contribution. And exactly, I truly believe that you cannot have a healthy society, an healthy community that doesn't produce its own story. I think there is an incredible line, Chimamanda, actually, she said, the author of Half a Yellow Sun, said also that stories are so important to create a large range of stereotypes. Stereotypes, she said, are not wrong, it's just are incomplete. And so there is very few stories that give a full picture of African society. And so this is an enormous contribution that these writers and these producers, these filmmakers are giving to their own society.
All right. Franco, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. I can see even the light in your eyes when you talk about Nollywood. Thanks indeed for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Born in Nigeria, B. Bandele started working on his first novel in his early teens. He has been internationally recognized as an important literary figure and has written several plays and novels. But what is it like to live in the diaspora and write stories about your homeland? Welcome, B. Welcome to South2North. Be from novels to plays and now you're into film. What is it about Half of the Yellow Sun that is appealing to you?
The moment I read it about 6 years ago, I just fell in love with it. And I was paranoid that if it was done by anyone coming from the outside, that they would make the kind of movie about Africa that I've seen so often.
Is that the stereotypes?
Yeah, and I watch them and I want to hide under the seat. I wanted a movie that basically depicted Africans as human beings and not just as this statistics, for NGOs.
That's a very powerful statement you've just made. And now that we're talking about Nollywood, I wonder whether Nollywood itself achieves that. What are your thoughts?
I think I love Nollywood. I think the reason Nollywood is so popular is because it speaks to millions of people. They see themselves in those in the characters. They see the characters basically are reflections of themselves.
Living in the UK and writing stories about Nigeria, I know that there is a big Nigerian population in the United Kingdom. Is the mission then different for you? Are you on a particular mission to tell Nigerian stories, particularly because you are not at home?
Well, a friend of mine who's from Zimbabwe, a writer who used to live in Zurich, and she said when she was in Zurich, she was simply obsessed with writing stories about Zimbabwe. She's now moved back to Zimbabwe, and she's writing a novel that's set somewhere else. I think I became much more Nigerian, actually, when I went to the UK, probably because I suddenly became a minority. I was not Nigerian, I was in Yoruba, I was black. I was this thing, and you basically have to fight to retain a sense of identity.
In Nigeria, you're just B. Bandele.
Yeah.
But when you're in the UK, you're not just B. Bandele, you're B. Bandele, the Nigerian writer.
Yeah.
So it becomes something that the world gives to you and you wear it. And I think, I've lived in Nigeria all my life, so I'm not sure I'm qualified to say this. But I guess when you're away from home, you miss it more. And when you're in a society that is clearly different from yours, you can only speak about the things of which you know. So
you'd agree with what we spoke about earlier with Franco and Yawende about the importance of storytelling and how it is very much aligned to our identity. It seems you've experienced that yourself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a great urge, a great need to tell stories, to tell African stories. I feel that not enough of it is being done. But I feel compelled to tell the stories through the medium of the cinema. And I think actually that's also a very Nigerian thing, to move with technology. In the 1940s in Nigeria, we had the traveling theater. So you had theater groups that moved from one town to another, from one village to the next, putting on plays in town halls and in village squares. And then television came, and a lot of it moved to TV. And then something went wrong in the political system in Nigeria. We had military coups. The TV stations were allowed to almost die out, and people still felt a need to tell stories, and Nollywood emerged from that.
Yawande, you've brought with you a clip from the film which has not yet been released, Half of a Yellow Sun.
your audience is very privileged to see this.
Let's take a look.
Will you come?
To the meeting? I'm not from Abba.
But you could be. If you married me, we should marry. No longer makes sense. Never made sense.
You'll have to take wine to my father then.
Is that a yes?
Yes. It is a yes.
Why did you use British actors in Nollywood film?
We use the best actors for the roles that they played. Nobody asks, why do you use African actors to play Americans? Or...
I suppose because it's Nollywood, our expectation is that it is purely and totally and wholly Nigerian.
The film was very well made in Nigeria. It was made in Nigeria.
So Bollywood is celebrating 100 years. What are your hopes for Nollywood? It's 20 years now. What does the future hold?
The film we've just made is half of a yellow sun. You know, the other half of the sun will rise on Nollywood. I think the future for Nollywood is very bright. I mean, Nollywood has already demonstrated what is possible with little or no support from anywhere. It has demonstrated what is possible and despite difficult circumstances. The next phase, the world will not know what hit it. Nigeria has 160 million people. I mean, one of the reasons Nollywood has traveled is because of the wealth of narrative that just exists in that sheer number of people. But my dream is a fully Nollywood production, made in Nigeria by Nigerian actors, with Nigerian cast and crew, but with the right quality of equipment. Because equipment says a lot about, if you write with a blunt pencil and you write with a sharp pencil, your handwriting will be exactly the same, but it'll look very different. That's what Nollywood needs to move to the next
your
level.
projections for the future of Nollywood and what it will take to get Nollywood to the standards that Yawende has just described.
Well, I think it keeps evolving. I mean, if you watch a Nollywood movie made 20 years ago and compared to something made last year, there's a world of difference, and I think that will continue happening. I think there is a whole generation of children right now, not just in Nigeria, but all over Africa, who are growing up watching Nollywood, watching other kinds of movies, reading, and some of us children will grow up into filmmakers.
It's already happening, B.
Okay.
It's already happening.
In fact, in reality, they're coming back and producing films.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm talking of in huge numbers, right?
I see a growing number of incredibly well-educated young Nigerians.
Some of them have studied
whose
overseas,
parents
and they're
want them to be doctors and lawyers and the regular professions, but they just want to be entertainers. And the difference between this crop and those who carried the craft to this stage is that they're very well educated. So they're as educated as their equivalent in the West. And they will layer on that, the Nigerian narrative. The world hasn't yet seen, what is possible from this group of people.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm actually thinking of people who are actually educated here in Africa. I mean, I look forward to a day when I can see in my local cinema in Lagos a film from Kenya, a film from Ethiopia, South African film, alongside with films from the UK, films from the US.
That day is almost here.
Well, Yawande says that day is almost here. We'll fasten our seatbelts and wait for it. Thank you very much, Yawande Saduku, for joining us on South to North. We really appreciate your input on this, and good luck with the film.
Thank you for having me.
B. Bandele, thank you as well for joining us on South to North.
Thank you.
Please tweet your questions, comments and opinions to @AJSouth2North or find us on Facebook. Remember, you can watch all our shows on www.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.